Recording and transcription. Perfect. So, as stated, we are going to record this meeting. So welcome, March 12th. We are a few weeks away from the first day to post scores, which is Tuesday, April 1st. And my name, if you don't know, is Rich Kennedy. Uh, I am the Director of Handicapping Membership Services with New Jersey Golf. And as you might see by my apparel right now, we have launched a new brand refresh, which we're really excited about. So we have evolved our name. Again, it's New Jersey Golf as opposed to New Jersey State Golf Association. As you can see, those of you who may not recognize the logos from our previous logos, we have a whole new look with our logos that we're really excited about. Um, so this morning we are here to learn about the World Handicap System rules of handicapping. We have about an hour and a half, or maybe a little more than that, where we're going to go through um, the rules of handicap in sections, section by section, and just really get us focused and ready to either as golfers. I know we have golfers on this call, or committee members or golf staff, just to get our minds focused on what's involved in handicapping, how do we best practices on creating equity and learning or getting a refresher on the ins and outs of the handicap system. I'd also like to introduce Will Luke on the call. He's the New Jersey Golf Tournament and Operations Manager. Will's going to monitor the chat. So generally, I'm gonna keep you all muted throughout the meeting. If Probably going to keep it that way. It just makes it easier from a sound standpoint. But use the chat feature up at the top of your there's a bar going across. If you click chat, and if you have questions throughout the webinar, just type them into the chat. When we stop for pauses in between sections, we'll take a look at those questions and answer them as best we can. Hopefully we got good answers for you today. This is my first educational webinar of the season, so I might be dusting off some rust here as well. But hopefully I'm ready to go to answer all your great questions. So let's go ahead. Let's dive in to the World Handicap System. As you can see, we got the brand refresh there. So let's just talk about some of those changes back in 2024, most of which focused on scores when holes aren't played. When you play more than 10 holes, but don't get quite to 18 holes. We changed our guidelines with regard to 9-hole scores. There's some guidance on allowances that have changed. We introduced a handicap review tool for reviewing, adding an extra element of a review for your golfers at your club. And we have a new minimum length for rating courses. We'll touch on all of those throughout the webinar this morning. Well, let's start with the purpose of the handicap system, and some background on the governance and how that all works. So basically it's the USGA and the RNA. They're at the top tier of governing rules of handicapping, rules of golf, rules of amateur status, and equipment. And all of these categories, one of the big changes that has happened throughout the past decade is really creating this world component, this continuity throughout the globe. So there's consistency with the guidelines and the rules. But the purpose of the handicap system, we're trying to enhance the game, and give as many golfers as possible an opportunity to maintain a handicap, to get a handicap, and give them the opportunity to use their handicap anywhere, without any questions, about what this calculation is in the U.S. or Canada, Australia, Europe, creating that consistency. If you go back 6, 7 years, um, we're almost at the point where we're kind of forgetting that time, but there was differences in how handicaps were calculated throughout the globe. There's still a little bit of that exists, but we're very close to having a unified approach to the handicap system, which is great for everyone. So how do we achieve this? And it really starts with the ability to rate golf courses, to establish a numerical value to the difficulty of these golf courses. And then we take scores as they relate to that numerical value to the courses. We create um, differentials that get calculated. And then there's other components that we use, with regard to maximum whole score, number of scores used for a handicap index, all of which we're going to touch on this morning. As an AGA, which is what New Jersey Golf is, we are an allied golf association of the USGA. We're required to issue course and slope rating for both men and women for tees up to 6,000 yards, and recommended to do both men and women up to 6,500 yards. So this is just a slide again, just to give you some background of the stakeholders involved. And you know, if you're on this call today, you're definitely, you fill in on one of these categories. Players, mostly players, golf clubs, handicap committees. But we're all in this. We're all working together to maximize the equity of the handicap system. So how can you obtain a handicap? One way is to join a club. That's so if you join a private club or maybe a traveling league, most of which have are using probably the GIN system. And a player must designate one club as their home club, and that's going to be responsible for maintaining their handicap index, making changes, conducting reviews. The player can have multiple home clubs. That's a question we get a lot. So players can be members of as many clubs as they want to be, and but they can and they can move, like the Florida player. When they're in Florida for the winter, they can shift their home club to that Florida course and then shift back to New Jersey when they come back to New Jersey. But we do need that designation. That creates a little more accountability for that golf club as the home club. Any questions so far? Will, anything coming up here?
Hey, Rich, nothing in the chat so far.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, moving on to section 2. So we're going to talk about acceptable scores. Here it states the scores a player submits for handicap purposes are at the core of the calculation of their handicap index. Rule 2 covers the conditions a score must satisfy for it to be acceptable, providing confidence that it will produce a reasonable evidence of the player's ability and ultimately a handicap index that is reflective of demonstrated ability. So these are some examples of acceptable scores, authorized formats of play in the company of at least one person. So if you're playing rounds of golf or you alone, those scores are not acceptable. You have to be playing by the rules of golf for a score to be acceptable for the most part. On a golf course with a current course and slope rating and during an active season. So as stated in my introduction, April 1 is the first day where if we're playing golf, we can post a score for rounds played. Despite how nice it's been for the past couple of days, those rounds of golf are not to be posted because we are in the off season. The off season began November 15 and it goes through March 31st. So here are some examples of unacceptable scores. If you're being coached on the course, if you're using equipment that's non-conforming, when in a competition where number of clubs is restricted, if you're playing an Ironman competition is probably the best example. When a score cannot be verified by another person, so there's an example again. Rounds played alone are not to be posted. When you haven't played the required number of holes, and when a player doesn't play their own ball, scrambles, alternate shot, where they're switching up, who's on strokes throughout the round. So here's some quick guidance on the committee side of things. In a situation when a player is disqualified from a competition for a breach of the rules of golf, this is why I indicated that rules of golf must be followed for the most part to post a score. But no significant scoring advantage has been gained. The score is acceptable for handicapping purposes. Good example here: player did not sign their scorecard. Obviously they're going to be disqualified, but that score as it sits, that should be posted to the player's scoring record. The player may have proceeded under an alternative option for stroke and distance. The model local rules is a good example of that, where you take that drop in the fairway, and then it wasn't in effect, and that may have resulted in a disqualification, but that score should be posted. And then another example is when a player used a distance measuring device while model local rule is in effect prohibiting the device. Again, that score should be posted. The committee has the final discretion, and it's all based on circumstances. Where a player has breached the rules of golf, in general play, knowingly failed to apply the correct penalty, the score should not generally be accepted for handicap purposes. Again, however, depending on circumstances, the committee has the discretion to produce an acceptable score by recording the actual score, adjusting the whole score using net double bogey, or applying a score of net par. So the minimum number of holes played is now, for a 9-hole score, is now 9 holes. So that has changed. It used to be 7. It is now 9 holes. It has been that way for the past 4 years, 5 years. And for an 18-hole score to be acceptable, now all you need to do is play 10 holes. And you will get an 18-hole score. This will come up again, but when 10 to 17 holes are played, so if you stop playing around 13, 14, 15 holes, and you want to get that score posted, you will have to post your score hole by hole. And we'll explain a little more about that as we get to future slides. So let's move on to adjusting hole scores. The point of this is for those, one big point is for those, those blow up holes. That's always been the case. We had a different system, years and years ago with equitable stroke control. Now we use something called net double bogey, but we're just trying to limit and limit the impact of really bad holes affecting a player's handicap index. So max scores for a player submitting their first scores to obtain a handicap index. So this is a brand new player. So you are going to have these new golfers. Hopefully we keep getting more and more new golfers that are looking to obtain a handicap index and track their games. The max hole score is going to be 10. So it's or par plus 5 strokes. In that case, that's a par 5 plus 5. So we're going to go plus 5 on those hole by hole scores for golfers who have not established a handicap index. After a handicap index has been established, we use that net double bogey. Players' maximum hole scores for handicap purposes is equal to par plus 2 strokes. And then if you're getting strokes in that hole, you're going to add that to the number. And again, we talk about just trying to limit the impact of those rough holes. So here are some examples. We have John Smith, has a course handicap of 16. So he's getting 1 stroke on the holes allocated 1 through 16. On the 17th hole, where he receives a stroke, his gross score of 9 would be reduced to 7. So 17 is a par 4. So again, we add 2 for the double bogey factor, and then we add another stroke for the net factor, and he ends up getting a 7 rather than a 9. And it shows here that his gross score is reduced from 88 to 86 for score posting purposes. If this was a competition, the 88 would go in as his competitive score, but for the purposes of posting scores, we take the adjusted 86. So this is just a helpful tip because it does get confusing. One net has a component of deducting strokes. But it's actually, in this case, we're just indicating that there's a handicap factor involved. So you're taking double bogey plus when you go for that net double bogey. So system, we're encouraging you to think of it as double bogey plus. And if you're saying to yourself, well, why didn't they just say double bogey plus in the system? That's you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But we're net double bogeys where they landed, so that's what we're going with. Okay, so when a hole is not played, score from an incomplete round or when 1 or more holes have not been played may only be used for handicap purposes if, among other things, the round has been played over at least the minimum of number of holes required for either 9 holes. 9 holes is required, or an 18-hole score, at least 10 holes must be played. And the reason for not completing the round was valid. So we're talking about rain and that kind of a thing. Darkness, bad weather, injury, or illness. A hole has not been declared out of play by the committee for maintenance purposes. A match finishing before the final hole on the course. So a lot of matches will end on the 15th, 16th hole, and then you don't play those final holes. Some invalid reasons might include weather, not prevent continuation of play, not playing a particular hole to avoid a high score, not playing the final holes on a course in order to avoid submitting a high score, any other situations considered unreasonable by the committee. For the committee handicap committee determines that one or more holes has not been played for a valid reason, 18-hole score differential will be created using their expected score for the number of holes not played. So this is that change that was implemented in 2024, where now we're taking the expected score for to get that 18-hole score differential. And here's an example of Jane Smith. She ends up getting 16 holes in, and we're going to create that 18-hole score differential for her. So first, they calculate a course rating for the 16 holes played. And again, this is all your app calculation service, computation service. GIN is what just about all of us use. It's automatically doing this. So it creates an actual course rating for the 16 holes played. So we have the 9-hole rating, and then we have a 7-hole rating. And you see right here, we have a 16-hole rating of 63.9. It does the same thing for the slope rating. Then we use those values and compare that to the actual the gross score for those, or adjusted gross score for those 16 holes played, which is a 78. We get a 16-hole differential of 12.7. Then using the player's handicap index, in this case 16.0, it's used to determine the expected score differential for those last 2 holes. So we get an expected score differential of 2.12, which is then added to the 16-hole differential, and that 18-hole score differential is 14.8. And there's a note here at the bottom. This is important to keep in mind when you're talking about this to either other golfers or members. The expected score differential is based on the average score differential of a player with a given handicap index and its normal distribution of strokes. So it is not specific to each player. So a little more background on how this all works. This is what the course rating is based on. Number of holes played, lengths of hole played, course rating information. This is what the AGA does. This is what our course rating committee does. Par is a factor. Slope rating for holes played is calculated using the weighted average of the slope rating of the full 9 that was played, and the slope rating and number of holes played on that 9 that was not completed. In this example, the front 9's slope rating was 125, the back 9 was 126. This produced a slope rating of 125.4375, which is rounded to 125 for display. So this is how it looks in the scoring record now, which I think is very helpful. Hopefully you saw this last year when you were looking at scoring records when the expected score differential was used for these rounds. So it shows you the your adjusted gross score, but then in parentheses right next to that, it gives you a 16, or if you played 12 holes. So it gives you that context that the player didn't actually shoot 78; they shot 78 for such and such number of holes. So what are the benefits of this? We're seeing more consistency than it would with the other, that net par, which is what we used to do. This is because the expected score is not course specific or reliant on the course's stroke index or allocation. For the first time, if between 10 and 13 hole scores are played, so it used to be, if you remember, you had to play 13 holes to get an 18-hole score. Now it's just you can between 10, 11, 12, you can still get that 18-hole score differential. And it's more modern. we're using data, and you're going to see more and more of that as we move into this information age that we're in. You're seeing it with playing. When we get to playing condition calculation, we'll talk about that, where we're able to create some algorithms that are going to help get us more equitable handicap indexes. These there are circumstances that might result in a player starting a hole but not holing out. So we all deal with this, whether it's and it's something, whether it's just a bad hole or just for pace of play purposes. Um, the result of the hole has been decided. A hole has been conceded. Player's partner has already posted a better score. All valid reasons for not completing a hole or not holing out. So this is why we use the most likely score. And when we're calculating the most likely score or determining the most likely score, we're going to start with the number of strokes you've made on the hole. And then we're going to add the number of strokes it would take you to finish the hole. And if there are penalty scores, we'll add those. So and what's great about the new system, by the way, is that we have guidelines now. Previous to the World Handicap system, we didn't have guidelines. We just kind of talked about, what a player needs to do. Now you can actually point to guidelines. If you go into the rules of handicap and these images that you're seeing right now, you're going to see these images. So when we're talking about a ball that is within 5 feet of the hole, we're talking about one stroke for the most part, unless it's a severe kind of 5 feet, where it's a lot of break and that kind of thing. We're really talking about adding one additional stroke. A ball that lies between 5 and 20 yards from the hole, we're talking about 5 feet, 20 yards. We're talking about 2, possibly 3 additional strokes that we're adding. Again, depends on the rating. I mean, the slope, the fluctuation, how difficult that putt is, where the ball is. If you see here, you have a ball that's within 20 yards, but it's in a bunker. So obviously, here we're talking about, at least 2 shots, maybe 3 shots to get up and down and 2 putt. If a ball is more than 20 yards from the hole, we're talking about 3 or 4 additional shots. So again, the images are great. Really kind of gives you, allows you to visualize scenarios and make that determination while you're on a golf course. Questions so far?
Hey, Rich, you got one just recently. So, kind of in relation to that missing holes discussions, are the scores automatically posted by Jin for these missing holes based on what you just outlined, or is the player to calculate and add?
Exactly. Great question. So the player doesn't have to worry about calculating or adding or doing anything. Again, the Gin app, what the player has to do is post hole by hole. As long as they're posting hole by hole, along with getting the stats and all that cool stuff, this enables the Gin system to do what it's supposed to do as far as calculating that expected score differential for those holes not played. So if they played 12 holes, they posted all 12 of those holes hole by hole. 13 through 18, the calculation service auto creates that expected differential for the remaining holes. So again, all the player has to worry about is just posting hole by hole scores, and they're good to go. Great question. Anything else, Will?
Yeah, hang on, we just gotta follow up. Sorry, no, I think we're good.
Excellent. So submitting a score. So this is an important section, and we're going to touch on a few different aspects of importance here. But we're going to talk about the importance of submitting scores at day of play for a variety of reasons. Um, Peer review, and then we're going to talk about some of the technology that's in place right now as well that posting after you play enables that to work better. So quickly, the information required. This is kind of standard. Again, if you're using a Gin app, this is not a lot of what players need to worry about because it's all going to be kind of built into that round that's being posted. The date, the course and slope rating, all that information is available in the app. It's important to keep these scores in chronological order. So if you have a golfer that is posting, new to the system, but maybe posting, 10 or 11 scores that they had with another app that they were using. You want to encourage them to keep those scores chronological. And you also have to remind them about the seasons. One of the things that I talk about when I'm talking to a new golfer is, hey, if you have rounds of golf play, that you played, if you have them, written down somewhere or recorded somewhere, use those scores, but make sure that the rounds in New Jersey, surrounding areas, that they're not rounds that were played in the off season because those scores can't be used. So it's just important to keep that information in mind. Um, Score posted into a player's scoring record. Player's scoring record must be posted by the player or the handicap committee in charge of the competition, or by anyone else authorized by the player. So straightforward. Um, Sometimes committees are using Golf Genius or other event management programs that allow you to post scores for the entire competition. Sometimes the committee will want to post scores in a competition or for players for a certain time period. Um, and if Will and I are playing golf, and he wants to post our scores, I can have Will post my score for him if he was keeping it, and vice versa, as long as I approve or he approves it. So the time frame is, the player should submit their score as soon as possible, the day of play after completion of a round, ideally before midnight. If the player does not post that day, their handicap index won't be revised that night. So again, one of the another great aspect of the World Handicap System is daily revisions that we implemented. So this, by posting it around that day, that makes sure your handicap index will be reflective of that round the following day. The other big factor here is the playing conditions calculation. That is, again, we're going to talk about that, but that is reliant on the scores posted that day. So in order for that to work the way it's supposed to, we need scores posted the day of play to make sure that calculation works the way it's supposed to. Score posted for handicap purposes must be made available for peer review. So again, peer review is important. So again, Will and I are playing golf, and we're gambling a bit, and he plays great, wins $20 from me. I want to be able to see that the next day, that he posted that score, and maybe his handicap index is going down. To obtain an official, so let's talk about the number of scores for an initial handicap index. So to obtain an official index, player must submit acceptable scores from a minimum of 54 holes made up by any combination of 9 and 18 hole rounds. There's no time limit on posting these scores, as they may be backdated. It is strongly recommended that initial scores are submitted hole by hole to better assist better assess players' ability. So let's just review this for a second. So again, when a player just starts off, we're not scaling up or using an expected score differential for the back nine. We are taking that 9-hole score, and we're looking for that golfer to get to 54 holes and revise that score. From that point, when the player gets their handicap index, now we have the ability when that golfer does post 9-hole scores and or 10 to 17-hole scores, now they get those expected score differentials. But initially, we're just trying to get to 54, combination of 9 and 18-hole scores that gets us to 54 holes to get that handicap index. Questions? Good? Okay, moving on. So we're going to talk about the handicap calculation. And again, we're looking to the index should represent the player's demonstrated ability, be responsive to scores that are inconsistent with their demonstrated ability. Rule 5 covers the process of calculating a handicap index and incorporates the safeguards needed to help ensure that a player's handicap index remains reflective of their ability and that equity is retained for all golfers. So this is the formula, for calculating a score differential. So differentials ultimately make up, the average of the 8 of 20 differentials make up that handicap index. So we're taking the gross score, subtracting the course rating, adjusting any PCC adjustment, that's a playing condition calculation, and then the slope rating divided by 113 to get that differential. And here's an example of an 85 and how we arrive at that 15.7 score differential using that course rating of 68.7, slope of 117. For 9-hole scores, again, it gets back to that expected score. In order to do that, we need one 9-hole. We need that 9 that's played to be rated. And, just again, a definition here of the expected score. I'll just read it. Score a player is expected to achieve over a specified number of holes on a course of standard difficulty. It is calculated using a player's handicap index and attributes a numerical value against any hole or holes not played during the round. So that back 9 score, or that that extra 9, it's not accounted for. We use an expected score differential. And here's an example. And we got John Smith this time. His index is 10.0. He shot a 42. The score differential is, for a front 9 is 5.42. And then we go ahead and calculate that 18-hole score differential. See the expected 9-hole score differential is 6.38 based on a handicap index of 10.0. And the equivalent 18-hole score differential ends up being 11.8. So his 42 goes in as, let's see, these are some more examples. It'll show up as an N score in his score history, but it will show that indicates it is a 9-hole score, but it will show an 18-hole differential. Here's another example. Player A with an index of 4.0. And he shot 42. So the idea here is, different all of these players shoot 42, but they all have different handicap indexes, and you can see how their expected score differential is different. Now, the main factor, so if you want to communicate this, the main factor in this calculation for expected score differential is the handicap index. And then the number of holes not played, whether it's 9 or if it's between 7, 8 holes, 6 holes. Again, it uses the handicap index to determine the that expected score differential. And here's a situation where it's the same handicap index, but different scores. Player A and player B end up with the same, expected score differential because their index is the same. But player C has, same index, but different score, therefore different expected score differential. And here's a scoring record. Again, it shows for the end scores, it doesn't show anything in parentheses. Like the 41 doesn't have like in parentheses a 9. But as you can see, the end kind of, that's the indicator right there that it is a 9-hole score. But ultimately we end up, if you look at that again, at 41, we have a 9.8 differential. That is an 18-hole differential. So what are some of the benefits of this 9-hole score procedure? Again, there's consistency, because it's just based on each golfer's handicap index. The responsiveness is great. It communicates to the golfer, hey, I'm going out and playing 9, but immediately that score is that round played on any given day. That's a 9-hole round. That's going into your 18-hole. It's going into your handicap index calculation like your 18-hole scores. It says impactful as your 18-hole scores. So you're not waiting, going back to 2019 where we waited for the next 9-hole score to be played, and that we just had that 9-hole score just sitting there, sometimes for over a year for you to play another 9-hole score. Now there's immediate impact. There's equitability. It's a better indication. It's a more precise indication of what the player would have scored on that second 9, as opposed to, you may question me on that, but like think back to when we were combining those 9-hole scores. You would play, and it would happen on certain days. You'd play great, play 9, play 9. You might shoot 39, and then a month later you play another 9. You play well again, and maybe it's another 39. So you have a 78 combined 78 in your scoring record, but the lowest 18-hole score you've ever had is 84 or 85. You don't have. And yes, I am talking about myself. That did happen. I did finally break 80, by the way. But yeah, but there's situations where a golfer can't even break 80, but somehow they have a 79 or a 78 in their scoring record because of those combined 9 holes. This is more equitable. You don't have that. You don't that scenario is no longer exists. And again, more equity, more reflective of players' demonstrated ability by doing it this way. So the last benefit we'll hit on is just the inclusiveness. Those 9-hole golfers, there's a lot of them, and I think this demonstrates to them that just because they're playing 9 all the time doesn't they can have as valid handicaps, equitable handicaps as the 18-hole golfers. They can be as competitive with their handicaps as 18-hole golfers can be. And those, getting those 9s in is big. It's great for the game. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Those late twilight 9s. Some people, that's all they have time for. So we want to be inclusive to those types of people because they're a big part of the game, and allowing them to to use the handicap system and get the same equitability out of the system. So here's an example of the this changed over in 2020 as well. We're now using 8 of 20 scores to calculate the handicap index. We're taking the 8 low differentials to calculate the for golfers who have 20 scores. But if they don't have 20 scores, you can see these adjustments at the top here, which I think are really smart. I thought this was a much stronger indicator for the golfers that are just starting with a handicap index to make this -2, -1 adjustment, because they tended to be inflated early on and maybe not equitable as equitable as we want them to be for competitions. So this is just an important chart to keep in mind. So we're taking the best, once we do get 20 scores, we're taking the best 8 of 20. Here's an example of the calculation. Those starred scores that you see, those are the scores that are being used. And again, the important thing to emphasize is it's not the low scores. And here's the score column. It's the low differentials. The low differentials is what determines ultimately determines the handicap index for golfers. And I'm just trying to see if there is an example here of a lower score than the score that's being used. Not in this example that I can see, but the low 8 score differentials are calculated to get you your handicap index. Maximum index, and again, we're back to this number 54. Maximum index is 54.0 for all golfers. Again, that's a change from pre-2020, where we had different standards for men and women, and now it's just for all golfers, it's 54.0. Committees in charge of competition can set limits. They can set playing handicap limits, so that's just important to note on the competition side. Frequency. So again, we're talking, daily revisions. That was a great change. So you play golf on a given day, you post your score. That score impacts your index the following day. I think I've almost forgotten, but not quite. We used to wait every 2 weeks for a handicap index to get calculated. That seems like an ancient approach to this process. The daily revisions is definitely an enhancement. Again, ensures it's updated as soon as possible. It allows for that playing condition calculation to work again. So the importance of a peer review, and then the availability for your peers, for your fellow golfers to go in and check your score, make sure that you're posting after you just took my lunch money on a golf course. And it's been great for well, I'll just say briefly, it's been great, I think, getting golfers into the game, because you can start a handicap, and if you have a lot of scores, post them, and then the next day you get that handicap index, as opposed to, again, back in back before 2020. It's like, hey, great, you got a handicap, you got a bunch of scores. Oh, by the way, you got to wait 2 weeks for the revision to actually get a handicap index. That was kind of frustrating. So definitely good for the game, good for the growth of the game, good for that immediate impact. So there's a rule here and a note. This is good for those of you who are running a lot of competitions and multi-round competitions. The rules of handicaping encourage you to set, if you're doing a 3-round, 2-round event, is to set a handicap index date or for the entire competition. And you shouldn't feel like as a competition administrator that you have to update handicap indexes before each round, before each day. Does give you the flexibility to, you can adjust playing handicaps in your competition if needed. If you need to, and if you do want to do that, you can. And you know, that's still, if you wanted to update handicap index each day of the competition, it doesn't restrict you from doing that, but it does encourage you to kind of lock in the index for the entire competition. So the score continues. This is 5.5 aging. The score continues to be part of the handicap index calculation as long as it remains within the player's most recent 20 scores recorded, regardless of the age of the score. So that's important to note. You know, and we do have a lot of those golfers who play 3-4 rounds a year, so they're going to have old scores from 2023, 2022, sometimes in their handicap index. But if it's within that 20, it remains in the scoring record. All right, so this is a good topic. Usually get a few questions out of this, which is so I'm expecting some questions, but we'll see how I do. So playing condition calculation is a statistical procedure that compares the scores posted by players on a day against the expected score based on the number and composition of the players submitting the scores. Composition, like the skill level, the handicaps. Each player has an expected score based on their handicap index. So all of us have a like a target score we talk about a lot, based on our index. If significantly few players in anticipated attain their expected scores, conditions are determined to be harder than normal. If significantly more players than anticipated attain their expected score, conditions are determined to be easier than normal. The adjustment, which ranges from -1 to +3, is based on the amount needed to move enough players into the expected scoring range and applied to everyone who posted a score for that day. So let's unpack this a little bit. So if it's not based on what I wanted to reiterate, it's not based on looking out the window, seeing that it's raining, seeing that it's 30-mile, 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts, or the superintendent coming into the office of the golf staff saying, "Hey, get your members geared up. We just rolled the greens and are rolling 14 on the stimp meter." That all that is impactful and may ultimately be the reason why we have a PCC. But the PCC, that playing condition calculation, is based on the scores and whether or not they're higher than normal, higher than what they're expected to be, or lower than what they're expected to be. Okay, example. So, well, here's just the formula that's used. This is where the PCC comes into play on the score differential. It's right at the end, right where you see PCC adjustment. It's the last adjustment that's made to a scoring differential. In this case, it's a 0, and nothing changes with the score differential, but it's always factored in there. So in this next example here, we added a +2 adjustment, and now we're going to see that -2 factor, and then we went down. So a plus factor means the course got played harder than usual. And that's why we're reducing that score differential, because that 94 just got a little better. That 94 got a little stronger than it was because the course was playing harder than it was rated for. Some key considerations to review here. The PCC takes place once at midnight local time each day. Players with a handicap index of 36.0 or less are considered. So the higher players with handicap indexes higher than 36.0 are not considered are not in the calculation. At least 8 scores must be posted on that day. The PCC adjustment could apply if a course is set up harder or easier than normal, which means it's important to ensure consistent course setup. So this is a good conversation. If you see PCCs showing up on your member handicaps, uh, you may want to, you can involve me at the AGA level, or the minimum, maybe talk to your golf course superintendent. Make sure the course is getting set up, the tees are being placed in the areas where we rated the course, and any other factors that may, again, green speed or just rough height, all these things to keep in mind. Manually entered scores are not considered. So it's important, the ratings that we have, the AGA certified ratings that are used through the GIN apps, the various GIN apps, when scores are posted that way, those scores are considered. But when there is that manual option that you can select that's used, it would not be considered. And scores must be posted that day of play. So if you're posting rounds the day after, they're not going to be incorporated for the PCC calculation. However, if I forgot to post my score on a day that the PCC was put into place, when I do post a score, I will get that PCC adjustment. Unfortunately, my score just wasn't used in the calculation, in the algorithm that it uses for determining the PCC adjustment. All right, that was a lot. We'll hit some questions if there are questions at the when we get to the end of the section. But let's just talk about the low handicap index. This is also new to 2020. The low index is your low handicap index within a 365-day period. So the system retains a memory of this index and uses it to determine whether or not there should be adjustments or suppressions to the handicap index, which we'll talk about in the slides coming up. Important reminders for the committee. Where a handicap committee applied adjustment reduces a player's handicap index, the adjusted handicap index resets the low index to the adjusted handicap index, unless a lower handicap index is still eligible. Where a handicap committee applied adjustment increases a player's handicap index, the committee should consider resetting the player's low handicap index to the same value as the adjusted handicap index. So what this is for consideration for the players. Why 365? We think it's enough time to consider the memory of a player's demonstrated ability, provides consistent time frame for everyone rather than a count of scores, which would be dependent on frequency of play. It enables a player who performed well in an annual event to potentially still be impacted in the same event the following year. So this could be a member guest type event, a 3-day kind of event that's annual, and it could be where they kind of gear up. Maybe this is the time of year that they play well. So it's these are things to keep in mind. So that low handicap index is going to impact the potential of a soft cap or a hard cap. So every time you post a score, there is a soft cap calculation that goes into play. It's determining whether your handicap index has increased more than 3 strokes. If it has, if it's increased 3 or 4 strokes, 5 strokes, it'll suppress that index to slow down the increase. And whether or not, after all that's been determined, whether we still get to a 5-stroke increase, if you are at 5 or above 5, we're going to cap you at 5. No golfer's index can increase more than 5 strokes during the course of a year. And so here's an example of a golfer's low index at 20.0 in June. Now we're in February, and it's at 23.0. So we got a soft cap trigger, and then we go a couple more months. We're now in April, and it's a 5 shot increase. So we have a hard cap uh, ceiling in play. And here's a good example of a soft cap. So the low index is 10, the current is 14. So we got a 4 shot increase on that low index. So we're focused now on that one stroke. We're gonna suppress that by 50% and recalculate the value for the handicap index at 13.5. So it's a 50% suppression of any strokes higher than 3 on the increase. And then our hard cap, here's a golfer, low index is 10. Now they're 8 of 20. Calculation is 18.0. So we got a 5 shot increase above 3 strokes. So we're taking that 50% again, but doesn't get us under 5 stroke increase. It's 15.5. So we just need to. That's where that ceiling comes into play. Just defaults rate to 15.0, which is that 5. It's held at that 5 stroke increase. So for the players, some key messaging. The cap is part of the calculation. It's applied automatically. There's no, the golf pro isn't doing it. The handicap chair, the golf chair isn't doing it. The president's not doing it. It's just an automatic calculation of the system. The purpose is to provide equity. Ensure a player's chance of playing their handicap is consistent with others. Without the caps, players can experience significant upward movement in a short period of time. And again, that's not, we want to slow that down. And it'll provide a better chance of a golfer, maybe potentially scoring low and then being a little bit more, being successful in tournaments where really, that's there's some concerns with equity. And most players who experience a cap will return to normal demonstrated ability. In many cases, the impact of a soft cap is only a few tenths of a stroke and may not change their course handicap. So this is the last point is important, especially for my golf administrators on this call, but it's important for golfers too. A lot of times when you see a cap, and it will show up, it's only a few tenths, and it's not the impact that you think it may have been. So it's important to address that there is an option in the USGA admin portal under the audit log where you can actually see what the golfer's handicaps index would be if the cap wasn't in play. So that's for my golf administrators. When you get some feedback from your members, definitely check that, and that'll help your communication with the golfer who may be a little concerned as to why they're being capped. So let's move on to exceptional score reduction. This is when a golfer really just plays great. They can play 7 strokes better than their handicap index, or 10. If they play 7 strokes better and higher, it's a -1. If they get to 10 strokes or better, it's -2. I always joke when I do these, if I achieve expected score differential, which I never have, I'm going to throw a party, because that'll mean I probably shot somewhere near par. I'd be very excited about that. It just doesn't happen a lot, is the point. But when it does happen, there is some impact to the golfer's handicap index, some justly impact. So here's what happens. So here's an example of a score history. Golfer with a handicap index just shot 75. See that differential there, 2.9, so it's 7.1 difference. So we're going to see an ESR. And so when you achieve an ESR, when a golfer achieves an ESR, that the score 75 gets that -1 adjustment. Score itself goes into the 8 of 20, obviously, and then every score in the scoring record gets that -1 adjustment. As the golfer continues to play, you'll see here those next 3 rounds, they don't get the adjustment. So it's just the score and then all the previous scores that get the -1 adjustment. So it gives a golfer a chance to just continue playing golf and maybe get back to normal at some point, but there's still the impact that they had, the impact of that really, really great round of golf. So I'm just going to pause there because that was a lot. Questions?
Yeah, Rich, there's one just is asking about posted rounds of less than 18 holes carrying just as much weight as a full 18-hole rounds.
So great question, and the answer is yes. So there's no it's really not a lot of there's not like a weightedness when it comes to the actual scores in the scoring record. They're all weighted the same now. Whether it's a 9-hole score, uh, an 18-hole score, or a round of golf played where you played between 10 and 17 holes. The weight of the final 18-hole score differential is the same regardless of those scenarios. So we're still taking those 8 of 20 scores, and that's the calculation. So there's no adjustment, no weightedness to it. I will say, from a review standpoint, from a committee standpoint, you'll be able to identify those scores. And if there is concerns around the golfer, whether there's equitability with their handicap index, that'll be data that you can discuss. That the golfer's playing a lot of all they play is 9-hole rounds. They're always walking off the course after 15, 16 holes. You may want to ask the golfer why they're doing that. So you can definitely use that information just to get some background on the player that you may be reviewing. But when it comes to the handicap calculation itself, all of those scores are weighted the same. Any other questions, Will?
Nope, you're all set.
Great. All right, so let's get into course handicap and playing handicap calculation. So the course handicap calculation converts a handicap index to the number of strokes needed to play to par of the tees being played. This allows portability of a player's handicap index wherever they play. It is used for the application of net double bogey and net par adjustments where appropriate. Where appropriate, it's important here because we really don't use net par adjustments only for beginner level golfers. So here is our course handicap calculation, and it uses that par adjustment, which again, that was new 2020. Now all of our courses pars are factor into that course handicap calculation. I used the term target score earlier in the webinar. So what you're seeing here is what we're talking about. This is what the system uses with the playing condition calculation, because every golfer that goes out and plays and posts a score, they have this target score factor attached to them. So what the system is using in that playing condition calculation is how many scores are above the targets, how many are below the targets, and that's going to help us determine how whether the course played more difficult or a lot easier that day. So it's a great number. It's important to kind of keep this in mind, and you're trying to play better than your target every time you go out and play. Playing handicap calculation is a little different. So this uses allowances, and this is that, and allowances that are determined by the format, and you're actually competing with the playing handicap. So it's a handicap that you're actually competing with. So this slide talks about the rounding that takes place with the playing handicap, and this is a question I get a lot, and I'm just focus on the middle, where it says course handicap unrounded. So that number you see there is what, when we're playing in competitions, the course handicap never gets doesn't get rounded. Um, and when we take 90% in a competition of a golfer's course handicap, we're taking 90% of their unrounded course handicap. And then we are rounding at the end when we determine the playing handicap. So you see that rounded 4 at the end when we take 90%. That does get rounded. But the course handicap is not a rounded number. And again, I'm going to use the word precise. It shows up. Those of you who use Golf Genius, there's some notes under handicap analysis. When you see that talks about precise, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here. This enables us to be more precise with the handicaps that are being used in competitions. Prior to this, back in 2019, and previously, there was this multiple rounding that took place that was not as precise. So we're just trying to make sure that we're only rounding the last part of the calculation. Calculation when multiple tees with different pars are being used. When a competition is played from 2 or more sets of tees, such as mixed gender, mixed ability events, no additional adjustment is required for the difference in course rating and slope. Depending on the format of play and any difference between par and tees, an adjustment for the difference in par is made to the playing handicap for equity purposes. For example, stroke play and match play formats where results are recorded as gross or net scores. If par is different on a hole in match play, the player with the lowest net score wins the hole. So again, here's our calculation. We do take the difference in pars. It's again mostly for stroke play. For match play, if it's a par 4 for men and a par 5 for women, and they both score the same, they both make 4s on the hole. Just because the woman birdied the hole doesn't mean she won the hole. It's the lowest net score. So if they have it with 4s, they both have 4s, net 4s. It's a tie and move on. And this kind of sums it up for us here. Course handicap is used for general recreational play, determines your target score. It determines the adjusting of hole scores for net double bogey. So when you going back to that early slide on net double bogey, we are using course handicap to determine where you're getting strokes and where you need to add a stroke if you maxed out on a hole. Playing handicap is used for competition. And course handicap, you against the course. Playing handicap, you against other players. Questions?
No questions, Rich.
Great. And listen, don't feel like you have to ask questions about that section right after. If you think of something, just put it into the chat and we'll address it at the next break. So this section, we're going to talk about committee. So what I want to add here, we are going to do a specific webinar on for committees, so be ready for that if you're a handicap chair, golf staff. We're going to do something when we get the next release of the handicap review tool, which we're going to talk about a little bit here in the slide. We're going to schedule something to try to get handicap chairs and golf staff in to talk about the phase 2 of the handicap review. So just be ready for that, and we'll dig in on more specifics with regard to the handicap committee. But let's go through this slide. Handicap committee has the responsibility of ensuring that players at the club have a handicap index that represents their demonstrated ability. The committee has discretion to conduct handicap review at any time. It is strongly recommended that they conduct a review at least annually for all players who have designated that club as their home club. Handicap review may also be conducted at the request of the player or another player at any time. So adjusting handicap index, that's going to be a function of the committee. And the committee should decide the appropriate course of action for any player, for any adjustment to a player's handicap index. One action could be resetting the handicap index by applying an adjustment to each of the most recent 20 score differentials. So you can see to the right, you have a -1 adjustment under handicap review adjustment. Freezing the handicap index at a level selected by the committee for a defined period, which is not to exceed 365 days. Whether to apply any adjustments remains solely at the discretion of the committee after taking into consideration any other knowledge the committee has relating to the player's demonstrated ability. Once the review is complete, the handicap committee can consider the appropriate handicap index adjustment for the player. Any adjustment to a player's handicap index must be applied only after the player has been informed, and has had an opportunity to respond to the handicap committee, and follow an appeals procedure if requested. Be a minimum of 1 stroke upward or downward. So a minimum of 1 stroke upward or downward. Only increase a player's handicap index by up to 5 strokes above the player's low handicap index, unless there are exceptional circumstances. In a situation where a player fails to post an acceptable score, the committee can determine whether the player's reason for not posting a score was justified or not, and take appropriate action. Players, so here's again, this is a great, if you are a committee member, take a screenshot of this. Justified reasons, and not justified. So not justified, players not discoverable, apply penalty score. So you can post a score. If you could discover it not discoverable, you can post a penalty score. Option to remove if actual score subsequently is discovered. Where the handicap committee concludes that a player failed to submit a score for the purpose of gaining an unfair advantage, post a penalty score. For repeated failure to submit a score, withdraw the handicap index, consider disciplinary action. So disciplinary action, I would call that maybe suspending them from competitions. Maybe you don't withdraw their index, but you're basically saying, you're where there's concerns around your handicap index, and we're not comfortable with you competing with other members. And then there's a hard example of withdrawing a handicap index. So the value of any penalty score applied to a player's scoring record should be appropriate for the circumstances and/or the player's intent. For example, intended to lower their index, it should be equal to the highest score differential in their 19 score. So they're trying to lower their index so they can get into some cup matches or some kind of, vanity type thing. You want to post something that's high. equal to their high score differential in their last 19 scores. Intended to raise their index, then your penalty score should be a low score. This is a golfer, sometimes call them sandbaggers, whatever. They're finding ways to post higher scores that are higher than their ability. We could penalize them by posting low scores. So you want to be consistent with your policies. So whatever, and communicate that to the clubs. And it's important to, again, we'll probably talk about this at the handicap committee webinar, but just note every time you take an action, committee action towards a handicap index adjustment or some kind of suspension, like that sets a precedent. And so you want to always keep the precedents in mind, because there's going to be future cases and you're going to fall back on those precedents. And it's, you don't, that consistency is what's going to really help your conversations with members, that these precedents, this is what was done, this is why, and this is why we're taking this type of action on in your case. Also note, you're not required to notify a player when posting a penalty score. Different than a handicap index adjustment where you are required to notify a player. Again, this gets back to withdrawing a handicap index. So this is, hopefully it doesn't get to this, but it might. Player does have to be informed. So if you are going to withdraw, the player's handicap index has to be informed to respond to the handicap committee or the AGA. Player must be notified of the length of time their handicap index will be withdrawn and any additional conditions. When reinstating a handicap index, the committee determines when the handicap index is eligible for reinstatement. To determine the handicap index at which player is to be reinstated, the handicap committee may consider reinstating the index at a level that the handicap committee feels currently reflective of a player's demonstrated ability. Allocating a handicap index as if the player were new to the sport, or reinstating the last recorded handicap index. So shifting towards competitions. So this is not necessarily the handicap committee, but the competition committee. When it comes to handicaps, you can set a maximum handicap index. You can set a maximum course handicap. You can set a maximum playing handicap, and reserve the right to adjust playing handicaps before or between rounds of competitions. Sorry. So, that's a good summary of the committees in charge of the competitions. Any questions? We're creeping up towards the end here, but definitely going to spend a little time at the end answering any questions you might have. But Will, anything right now?
Nothing right now, Rich.
Yeah. So we talked about handicap allowances a little bit, and how they determine playing handicaps. So this is just a chart of the recommendations for your events, and keyword being recommended. I would encourage you to use these. There's data. This is data-driven recommendations, and these have been revised from 2023 to 20. When we did a revision last year. This is a new aspect of it. Field size encourages you to maybe evaluate, the skill level of your field, the level of handicaps of your field, and there's some guidance as to whether or not to either, increase the allowance or decrease the allowance. This chart gives you, this is a nice way to determine whether or not you want to enact either increase in an allowance or decrease in an allowance. So this was something that, again, came up a lot last year, the 4-ball match play scenario. There's some concerns about how the allowances were being used. The allowance, or some confusion, not really concerns. I think everybody understands that this is a more precise approach, but different than a stroke play match. The allowance, if there is a 90% allowance, it's being applied to the strokes gained off a player gained off the low handicap player in a group, as opposed to everybody just getting reduced by their course handicap being suppressed 90%. The suppression occurs on the strokes that I'm gaining off of the low player, and again, it's an unrounded number, and we're taking 90% of that unrounded number, and we're only rounding at the end. So it's more precise, but it did create some confusion, and then some concerns about how the information was being printed on scorecards. Also created confusion when there was just a one stroke kind of difference. But again, it is more precise, and definitely reach out if you want more explanation or more assistance on how to manage this for these formats. Plus handicap players. So when applying an allowance, handicap allowance and reduction will also result in a play and handicap closer to 0, including players with a plus handicap index. So this can be kind of confusing, but this slide should help explain that. And handicap review. So this is a vital role in maintaining the equitability of handicaps at your clubs. Strongly recommend that you conduct a review on a monthly basis for the 12-month period. Again, at a minimum once a year, but the recommendation is to do it monthly. Consistency, objectivity is crucial, and use the new technical specifications provided for reports, the handicap review tool. Right now, the tool is good for players. My administrators on the webinar today, you're able to log into the admin portal, go under any player record, and conduct a review. Again, within a few weeks, we're going to have that club-wide review, which will automatically flag players, and be ready for a kind of a pop-up type webinar where we're going to try to get as many committee members out as can, and we will record that and circulate it to get that information out there. So how does it work? Player equations are used to determine a player's expected score based on standard deviation. So we're using, that target score comes into play that we talked about. It comes into play with PCC, comes into play with expected score. It comes into play with handicap review. Again, how many times is this player playing better than their handicap or worse than their handicap? So there's flags that are applied, and the overall frequency of play is also taken into consideration. So access to the report, again, the slide, is assuming that you have access to this report, which you don't have right now. We're a few weeks away, like I said, but you do have access to run on the review for your player. But we're waiting a few weeks for you to actually get access to that report. And we're going to encourage you to run this report monthly. Actually, I think it'll be with this language, it does say it will be run automatically each month. So that if that is the case, then we'll probably be able to set up any golf staff, handicap chairs will be kind of receive this email automatically on let's say the first of every month, and then you can go in and run a report as needed. Reviewing the report. So you'll go through, you'll see flagged players. So it's going to be strongly recommended that you do follow through on these recommended adjustments, but they still are recommended. But we're strongly encouraging you to act on those recommendations. You're going to have 2 weeks to act on those recommendations. So that just keep that in mind as well. And it's also you want to note this is the real difference between like this and Cat Patrol. And we'll probably do a deeper dive at the handicap committee webinar. But the Cat Patrol does take into place how your members place in events, whether they win or place first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It takes this does not. This does not. How one, there's some language, how one finished in a competition should not be used for making an adjustment to a player's handicap index, but instead an inspection of scores for the competition against their scoring record. And again, let me remind you too, the Cat Patrol recommendations are only for your tournaments. Those Cat Patrol adjustments are not to be used to adjust a player's handicap index, but only a play and handicap for your tournaments. And this is that 2 weeks, making that decision. So you're gonna have 2 weeks to make those adjustments that are recommended. The player must be informed if you decide to make the adjustment. The tool will provide the ability for the committee to apply the recommended adjustment or not, or to look at greater detail that provides more information about the player. So there will be some more information to go along with the adjusted recommendation. And this just gives you an idea of how the calculation is going to work, for the number of flag scores, number of scores posted. Table shows how many flags are needed for a player to be recommended for a downward adjustment. So scores reviewed between 1 and 14. If they get 2 or more scores that are flagged, then it's going to be adjusted. As they post, 56 plus, they're going to need more flag scores. Players are evaluated through an automatic iterative process done by the USGA Handicap Review Tool. If a player is identified for a recommended handicap index adjustment of 1.0 upward or downward, then the evaluation run again using the adjusted value to see if a greater adjustment should apply. This continues until no further adjustment is returned. For example, if the analysis shows an upward adjustment of 2.0 to a player's handicap index is sufficient, then that will be the recommendation provided to the handicap committee. So other considerations for handicap review, player scoring record, trend of players' handicap index differences over 2-year period, 12-month, 2-year period. Frequency of score submissions, comparison of average score differentials between casual and competitive rounds. Again, the 9-hole scores, 9-hole rounds. I mean, so all this information will be available to help you kind of, get the background you need on a player when you're deciding whether adjustments should or should not be put in play. I'm going to kind of fast forward here on the adjustment examples because again, that's going to be something that we're going to hit on at that handicap committee. If you have questions about it, I'll definitely go back. But we are a little short on time. I don't want to keep you much longer than we have to. But this is a great section right here: stroke index allocation. Something, um, especially my course administrators want to discuss, review um, after we rate the course, or whenever if there is a consensus that this should be changed. So this is kind of this will help with that process. So your stroke index allocation. So this is an example of an 18-hole stroke index allocation. More times than not, you see odd holes on the front, evens on the back. So you get, and the idea is to determine where strokes fall, where the golfer who needs strokes is going to get those strokes during the course of a match, uh, or in a stroke play competition, four ball type competition where it may be impactful um, with that regard as well. Um, So here's an example. Again, odds on the front, evens on the back. Doesn't always have to be that way. If your back nine is generally more difficult than the front nine, it is recommended that your back nine have the odd strokes and the front nine has the even strokes. What that does with odds and evens on front and or back, it spreads the strokes out across 18 holes. And then what this slide talks about is how what we refer to as a triad approach to the stroke index allocation, where we're trying to put the one stroke hole in the middle triad here for the fourth and fifth and sixth hole. 5 and 3 are either on the front triad, 1, 2, and 3, 7, 8, 9, and then the same for the back. We're we're trying to again spread the strokes out. It just helps the dynamic of the match, and it listen again. The clubs determine this, and so sometimes the triad will kind of conflict with a consensus on what's the harder hole, what holes I need strokes on, and that kind of thing. But we also want to consider the match dynamic and how it can be awkward and create some equity issues if the 1, 3, and 5 stroke holes are right up against each other. So you're if you're getting strokes, you're getting strokes and 3 holes in a way. It's better to kind of have them spread out. So I work with clubs on determining, always there to help you determine what the best approach is at your course. I would say it needs to make sense. It helps to make sense to your members, and but you're never going to make everybody happy. Everybody's right. Everybody's opinion is right when it comes to where they should be getting strokes or where they shouldn't be giving strokes and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to come up with one stroke index, and it does help. It does help to have a set stroke index again helps that match dynamic. So you do your best and try to make it as equitable as possible, make it make sense to as many people as possible, but you're never going to make everybody happy, or you're never going to build a 100% consensus on this type of allocation. So par, again, par beginning in 2020, par became a bigger factor in the handicap calculation as it's used in the course handicap adjustment. So it's important. So here are some guidelines on establishing par. So you find this in the rules of handicapping. And there are different guidelines for men and women, as you can see. You want to create a standard par for your men, standard par for women. I know there are circumstances where a hole will play a lot differently from a certain set of tees, and it may feel like, hey, or it might make sense to make it a par five from the back tees and a par four from the more forward tee, more forward sets of tees, or and that comes up. But ultimately, consistency wins out. So if you are in a situation where your forward set of tees, which was put out there for your golfers that don't hit it as far, for some of your older men, perhaps, um, and even though the hole is a par four or is a par five, but the senior tees or the forward tees are 350 yards. You know, we're telling you, it's okay to keep the hole as a par five, even at 350 yards, for that level of consistency and that understanding that for everybody else in that hole, for the other tees in that hole, it's playing anywhere from 470 yards to 570 yards. So those are the types of things to keep in mind. Again, you have this chart, but what we're telling you is use the chart as your kind of base, but understanding that you're going to make adjustments according to creating a more consistent dynamic on your golf course. And we'll kind of finish up, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but the course rating system, it's just important to know that everything we talked about here today doesn't happen without the ability to measure courses accurately and using the guidelines in the course rating system that help us determine the values we need when it comes to trees, bunkers, greens, topography, uh, elevation, fairway size, anything you can think of. All of it is put into the course rating system to help us get these accurate numerical values that determine the difficulty of the golf course. So scratch player. So we're rating that course rating is it's difficulty of a course for a scratch player. Scratch player is a player with a 0.0 handicap index. The slope rating comes from the difference between how a course plays for a bogey player and a scratch player. So you can see here we have a bogey. The definition is a player with a handicap index of 20.0 for men and 24.0 for women, approximately. And again, that indicates the relative difficulty. That relative value is what is where we get our slope ratings. And this is an example. Here's a course of the very common scorecard right here. You got your combo tees, black, blue, white, all the way down. I mean, there's got to be hundreds of courses with similar type tee names, layouts. Here's the information that course, bogey rating, slope rating. The minimum length of a golf course now, this has changed. To get a course rating is 750 yards for a 9-hole course. So this is exciting. We're now, like these par 3 courses that we have in New Jersey, some really good ones. We can now give these courses a rating. So golfers, when you go play there, they can post. New golfers can get into the system sooner. They can start posting scores if they're into tracking their games, posting scores at an earlier stage. And it's, mom and dad can take their kids out when they're young, and they can play and post, and maybe get their kids playing and posting earlier because they're playing shorter courses. And it's just really exciting to be able to do this at a lot of, we got about 15 courses, short courses in New Jersey that we rated last year as a result of this. All right, so I am concluding this webinar, but before that, Will, what do we have for questions?
Nothing new, Rich.
So feel free, if you have any questions right now, fire them out there, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that and ask a question. This is the time to do it. I am, as stated, this is recorded. This will be circulated to you all, or accessible to you all through the Teams app if you want it, if you want to do that. But we are going to be posting these recordings on our on the website, njgolf.org. So you'll be able to copy that link and circulate it to committee members, potentially to your membership if they're interested. Um, and it'll be available if you want to reference it at any point throughout the year. Hey, I know Rich brought that up. I'd like to go back and just listen to that again. So that's going to be available to you. So one more thing for my handicap administrators. Again, you have so there's no quiz this year, which is so you don't have to worry about that. Somebody at your club has been sent an email, and it's just an assessment email with a link. Click on it, please. It takes about 15 seconds to just make sure that the correct contact and email address for whoever your representative with regard to World Handicap System is correct. So look for that. If you haven't gotten it already, you can email me and I can check on it to see if we can resend it or that kind of a thing. Again, April 1st is the first day to post scores. Next week, we are inviting back our golf administrators, golf staff, anybody interested, anybody who's involved in using the USGA admin portal for the next webinar. That's going to be next Wednesday, same time. The week after, it's going to be a Golf Genius webinar. So that's going to be just a nice overview of how to use the Golf Genius program for running your tournaments. And again, once we get the launch in place for the handicap review tool, we are going to probably hold a pop-up webinar within a week. So I'm thinking April 7th is the date that they're talking about for that handicap review tool. So expect some kind of webinar to come after that within a week or so after that. Thank you again. I'm looking at, so there's a question about slides. I do see the questions now, Will. There's a question about slides. We're not going to give out the slide deck, but we are, again, the meeting's recorded, so you can use the meeting however you see fit once you can get access to it. Thank you all. Good meeting. Hopefully you got something from it today, and reach out to me. I'm here for you. I do really enjoy working with you all on these topics and guidelines in the handicap system, and I know some of them are tricky. And when especially when it comes to your memberships and adjustments and trying to do the right thing for your club. So we are here to help. So reach out anytime, either email or call. Thanks again. Bye.